вже всі такі напружені, як перед ростером. Доброго дня, слава Україні! Що ви всі такі сумні?
Ще кілька секунд і починаємо трансляцію. Добрий день, ми вітаємо.
Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukrainian Media Center, Ukrinform. I'm seeing we have a lot of guests in this studio today. My name is Yulia Laputina, and today we will be talking about the very important subject about the veterans. It's day 343 of the full-scale invasion, and it's year 9 of the war. So the subject we will be talking about, that we will discuss, is very important for our society. I see a lot of civil organizations, a lot of veterans here in the studio. So all these 9 years our society was facing the fact that we have a lot of veterans, a lot of men and women went to the front lines to defend our homeland, and we understand that after the war is over, our task, our duty, both as a society and government, with the support of international organizations, to make their return home comfortable and convenient. Our speakers today will be Yulia Laputina, the Minister for Veteran Affairs, Vyacheslav Raevsky, serviceman, and Konstantin Malyava, again the serviceman. Miss Yulia, maybe first will be your word, return of our servicemen after the war. What's next? Well, good morning, everybody. I want to thank our servicemen, first of all, those who are here and those who are in the front lines, for their great job, so we can have this press conference, so we can have this discussion. They give us hope for victory, and really glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Very important topic indeed, but it would be way better if within these 30 years of independence we take care about this policy way before. Now we understand that the servicemen, they get back to the civil life after they retire, after the 30 years. I have 27 years of military service myself, but people who are still capable of working, they get back to the civil life, and they're not being supported in their integration, because military service is something absolutely different. Even during peace times, it implies certain restrictions, certain limitations. They are the conditions of service where you don't belong to yourself, you belong to the armed forces, you belong to your unit, which is regulated by the military regulations, manuals. You spend 24/7 on your service, and when a person comes back to the family after 25 years, and the family is like, who is this? We haven't seen this person within 25 years. And that's some post-Soviet inertia. This is why the most important reform that we want to implement today is the reform of implementation of mechanism of transition from military service to civil life. And it's not only after the victory, but it's even for those servicemen and servicewomen who are retiring after all those years of service. And now that we're having this full-scale war, and we expect the victory very soon, guys, we rely on you heavily. We will have to cope with the systemic challenge, the mass mobilization. When people who got mobilized, they received combat experience, and the things people see in the war, well, the war is not normal. People get the reaction to the war as, I mean, psychological reactions, moral, physical, and we have to understand that people return from war different. And we have to create the conditions for their comfortable transition to peaceful life, and the government should be taking care of it. If we may proceed to the presentation, I will show you our vision, our philosophy of veteran-related policy, the way it is and the way it's supposed to become. Within 30 years of existence of our state, no one was pondering over the fact where the people get after their military service as they retire. Even 9 years ago, when there was no war, who are those people? What age are them? What's their specialty? What's their profession? And how do they continue their life? Because even if we take a person who enters a military educational institution, they are graduate, they serve, and after 25 years they retire and no one knows where they go next. So the government policy for servicemen as the management of human resources in security area, we as a government, we should know even after the victory how many people will be there in each region, in each district that transition to peaceful life after military service, say within 1 year. And within that year we have to offer some instruments for them that would ensure the good transition, the comfortable transition to peaceful life, like medical examination, training for civil specialty, or maybe the opportunity to establish their private business. We analyzed our data in the Veteran Electronic Register, and we've seen that many people want to do their own business. They don't want to be hired employees. A lot of people go to agrarian business. Those are no big businesses. They are small farms that allow people to not only get their families involved in that business, but also to rehabilitate psychologically by work on the land with animals, with the cattle. And some people, for example, they go to IT area and we have to provide those instruments for development for them. Well, I'm not going to go along the slides. There is a form for the defenders. So we worked out the formula for defenders when the servicemen and servicewomen are in the front lines. They're the defenders. As soon as we win, we have to do everything we can so they become the warriors of renewal. We have to rebuild the country, and the defenders who had combat experience have to integrate into the society, into their communities. They have to raise the country in economic level. They should be competitive in the labor market, and the government should provide them with everything, like free training for civil specialty, the opportunity of mental and physical health screening, and then private business, hired employees, or so they become anyone who pays taxes, so that their families understand that we don't only pay some allowance which would not influence the economic condition of the family, because in some way it's humiliating for a defender, because they are the grown-ups who want to integrate in the society, who want to develop their country, and on the other hand they would pay taxes which will support all the areas of our life further on. But we understand that our enemy, I mean, before Russia splits apart until the very end, well, our enemy will be by our side, and we understand that all those warriors, all those fighters, our defenders, are a potential for national resilience. So we have to maintain them in the condition that would ensure that they can, in case of escalation, go back to the front lines to defend their lands. And this is the government who should be taking effort for that. For example, you know that in Israel, all the people, no matter the gender, either men or women, they undergo special military training, the refresher training, and we also have to implement, we have to take relevant steps to ensure the consistent military training for all the population. And those servicemen and servicewomen who have combat experience, they should go to military educational institutions. They should train the other ones. So because we will end up at the point where we will all become defenders, because I mean, in those regions, even in those regions where there is no active warfare, but we have missile strikes all over Ukraine, so everybody has to have military training. So defender in the formation and warrior of renewal in the peaceful life, and potential for national security in case of escalation, in case of threat to national security. So this is what happened in February last year, because when everybody who had combat experience in Kiev, Chernihiv, Cherkasy or Kharkiv region, even without any notice from a military unit, they took up their arms, they took up their guns, everything they had at home. They didn't ask anybody whether it's necessary or not. They just took up their arms and they went ahead to defend their homeland. I'm proud of those people. I was talking to Mr. Valery Zaluzhny in the very beginning of the escalation. He said, like, you understand, like, there is no military theory that describes people with the hunter guns and with the Molotov cocktails dressed in shell suits who go to the front lines to defend their lands with the grenades in their pockets. Well, we have a lot of theoretic things, but I will be practical. I will share just the most necessary information with you. Well, when I came to the ministry, I understood that they had no budget at all. There are papers, there is an institution, there are relevant programs which are not quite up to date and modern. So we started trying to find ways for the ministry to make it able to raise more international aid and other resources to have the programs implemented. So first of all, we had this biggest problem. It was the dwelling, it was the bulletin for the people. We have four categories of the people: those disabled as a result of war, the members of the families of those who perished in the front lines, and the sensitive category, the participants of ATOOOS, who are at the same time internally displaced persons. So the people who evacuated their families from temporarily occupied territories and who went to the front lines themselves. So people who basically lost everything. So if we don't solve this problem, we can send those people to, say, psychological rehabilitation or medical rehabilitation to a medical institution, but those people who have nowhere to come back to. And with the support of the government, of the parliament and president, we were allocated 5 billion hryvnias to provide those people, because the country accumulated a queue of more than 3,000 people, and we were talking to the government of our country. We were saying that we have to provide a transparent mechanism for provision of dwelling for the servicemen, but those 3,000 which were accumulated years and years before, and thanks to our requirements we were allocated those funds, but due to the sequestration of the budgets, those funds were channeled to defense because in February last year, country ended up in a very vulnerable situation, and those funds were reallocated due to the sequestration of the budget. But this year they were reallocated again, and we will track that process so that the people who are in queue in the regional administration, so that they receive their dwellings, their apartments, their new homes. We were trying to find ways to expand our opportunities, and we created the All Ukrainian Veteran Fund. It started working this year. I think it's visible on the social media now. And as a budget government institution who takes care of the programs, including grant support of the veterans, we already raised international funds. There is a hotline of psychological support under crisis conditions. We can share the information about the phone number. That was this hotline was established for those donor funds. Well, this hotline is very respected. It enjoys extensive respect in the veteran community. All the psychologists are properly trained and certified, and this program works. People call with different questions. They call when they feel difficult. They call when they are concerned about the lives of their close ones which are in the front lines, or the families of the veterans. They call when they feel difficult during the missile strikes. Well, they feel traumatized. And we also work on the creation of both individual and group support for the people who lost their close ones in the front lines. We also understand that our veterans are very active people, and many of them, they have their own businesses. So we established 2 grant programs in support of a veteran community. There were 2 bids already. We would like to have them expedited, but there are regulations by Resolution 190 when the Treasury pays funds gradually according to priority, like defense, security, and so on and so forth. We had 2 bids. We have a lot of winners. We have many interesting projects, including those which support our defense and security. There are veterans who manufacture the weapon cleaning agents. There are women's initiative who make uniforms. There are winners in agrarian sector and a lot of other very interesting people. Obviously, that program should be continued, but the problem is that the veterans, and I want to call everybody who gets involved in those programs, please use carefully the information which is available in the Ukrainian Veterans Forum, how to fill the forms properly, because people fill them improperly. We train the potential participants, potential bidders, and we will develop this area too. Another very important matter is the psychological rehabilitation, because as I mentioned, people come back home different from war, and that's a normal reaction to abnormal conditions, and they need support, they need assistance. And in the Ministry for Veteran Affairs, we have 5 rehabilitation centers, and we will reformat them according to modern conditions. In Kiev region, in Borodyanka, our psychological center was destroyed by a tank, and now our flagman project is the reconstruction of that center and the establishment of an up-to-date psychological support center for veterans and members of their families. We have project paperwork developed already. Our psychologists are quite heroic people, because they continue to provide psychological assistance to the people, even during those horrific events that were going on in February, March last year in Borodyanka. So during that full-scale invasion, they acquired exclusive experience of psychological rehabilitations in conditions of warfare, in combat conditions. So we want to scale that experience. We want to build this up-to-date rehabilitation center under patronage of President Zelensky, who already transferred a couple of his international awards. He was awarded with the Medal of Freedom, the American award, which amounted to $100,000. He received it he was awarded in United States, and he transferred those funds for reconstruction of the psychological support center. We are also being helped a lot by our Polish colleagues and a lot of other donors around the world. But one thing is psychological support, and whole different thing is the study of facts and acts of genocide of the Ukrainian people by Russian troops. I want to include the scientific component to study how is it possible, how did it become possible that those people, or I would rather call them non-people, who could commit those horrific things against children, against women and civil population during the war. So this is one of our flagman projects. I can answer your questions, but in general, this is our vision of veteran policy. Thank you, Ms. Yulia. Vyacheslav, the words adaptation, rehabilitation, starting from 2014, they entered our everyday life. So in your opinion, as a serviceman, what needs to be done? What are the main challenges that we have to cope with already now? Well, maybe in the beginning I will tell a couple of words about myself. I want to thank the Ministry for Veteran Affairs. I'm not some incredible veteran. I'm not a big serviceman, but I was invited. I have some combat experience, and my short life. I spent about 30 years in the armed forces. I started my military service back in Soviet era, and then in Ukraine I was serving as the platoon commander, as a company commander, officer of the staff brigade. Then I became a philosophy doctor and commander of a section in the military institution. I met the war back in 2014. I was involved in some information warfare. I was training officers in Kiev for the teams of international cooperation. I was on rotation in the area of anti-terroristic operation, as it was called back then. Well, definitely, we were talking to our brothers in arms. I will repeat it oneself, that war is something that you can, you can come back from, but you never return from war. So war is something that changes you forever. And from the very first years of war, it made me crazy when you come back from Avdiivka, and then you come back to, then you go back to Konstacha, and you go back to Kiev. It's only 7 or 8 years you come back to Kiev, and the life is vibrant here, nightclubs and everything. I was going crazy about that. It was back in 2015, 2016, and there was an opinion in the front lines when you were asking the you were asking the servicemen in the front lines, what do you guys need? Do you need any food? Do you need any uniforms? And many people started pondering over this matter. They said we need no material things. We have to have realization that something we do that people back there in big Ukraine, they need it. But when you get back to big Ukraine, the feeling was very weak that someone else needed it. And it resulted in psychological troubles. Well, even regardless the fact that I'm not a big combatant, you sit on a bus and you hear somebody, some ape hearing some Russian music. Well, it was driving us crazy. So all the veterans, everybody, we need psychological support. And when there are some resonant political events in the country, and the veterans back in 2019 ended up in psychiatric hospitals, and they were asked, like, what happened to you? They said, I'm just sitting in this special section, I'm not being let home. You see, there are different resolutions being taken. I was in the front lines for 5 or 6 years before, and now there are resolutions taken which show you that it was all in vain. So when you come for your land, when you come to apply for your land plot, you're being responded that there is nothing and there will be nothing, so go away. And there is no allocation in the budget. Like, there is no land plot for veteran, but they fill the budget at cost of selling the land, so it's incoherent. And we need this psychological support again, because even fighting with bureaucracy, sometimes it's like hitting the wall. And the Ministry for Veteran Affairs that was created a couple of years ago, their projects, they helped me personally. I had psychological troubles after I retired back in 2018. I was physically feeling when my roof was getting on fire. I was visiting psychologists, but it didn't help me. Unfortunately, some psychologist services are not of real high quality. Sometimes I was feeling that I was about to explode. I found a psychologist, very beautiful girl. Well, I'm not trying to be sexist here, and she was like, well, what troubles you? Some impressive episode of your life? And I was like, oh my God, child, what should I tell you? Oh, there was a case in Avdiivka, and from the Avdiivka mine, there is a small forest, and there was a fine skirmish, and we wounded one of those apes in his stomach, and he stumbled across that bush in the forest, and then he got all his intestines hanging on that bush. And she was like, oh my God, how can you tell us this? Well, it's a negative experience, obviously. Well, you cannot get supported by psychologists like this, because I had to support her. Well, I'm talking about Yermis. Is it the structural unit of the Ministry for Veteran Affairs? Well, it's a civil organization, but they're being supported by the ministry. So I went there. There was a good psychologist, and she asked me what troubles you, and I told her 1, 2, 3, like a couple of things. Well, I would go in the mountains. I like to hike, so she asked me if you have any dream, and I said I want to write a book. So she said, yeah, exactly. This is something that you should do. Write a book about your memoirs. So I made it. I don't try to show off here, but when I had the first specimen in my hands, printed out in Vivat editorial in Kharkiv, it was not the directly influenced by that I got rid of my nightmares, but there is the trend that I can track, so I appreciate the job done by that psychologist from Yarmiz. I don't remember her name, but after I issued the book, I wanted to do the presentations to spread the book, because it costed me something. I wanted to... So it's a creative self-expression. Yes, so really when you come to a center and when you say, I want to make a presentation, there is some stupid bureaucracy, like write us a letter, you understand this veteran literature, it's very specific, but for the book to be sold well, it should be interesting for all the population of Ukraine, like it should be economically feasible. But in Yarmiz we had the first presentation for my book, and for me it was psychological support for the veteran. They were supporting me, they were telling me, yeah, go ahead, write that book. So this is something to make the people adapt to the civil society, because there is also legal support necessary. It's all very integrated, because when you go to a government agency and they, I'm sorry for my French, but they shit in your head, but when you just turn away and you walk away, but when you're being psychologically and legally supported, you understand that you, in your turn, can support your family, both psychologically and materially. So support with employment, support with establishing private business by a veteran. You don't want to submit to anybody, like you want to be your own commander. So I cannot say that I had a lot of positive things from Ministry of Veteran Affairs, but a couple of times when I cooperated with them, it was good, it was pleasant, and I was regarded as a human. Report is over. Well, thank you for sharing your case. When you talk about cooperation between our veterans and civil organizations who really understand the topic of veterans, who understand what is the support needed for them, and when that help is not professional, it will be a good message for the civil organizations who work with veterans. Please remember that professional help is necessary. Konstantin, I'm happy you have something to share from your experience. Good morning, everybody. I agree with my colleague. I personally did not go for psychological support even after my first wound. I met a couple of times with such incompetent psychologists. For me, it was again Avdiivka, industrial area. There was a woman coming to us who were asking us about our problems, and I said, like, I think our guys won't tell you anything. Right in the positions, what kind of psychological support can be right in the battle position? I was retired when I was wounded. I had trouble moving, and the psychological support was established based on the American experience, when the guys, they sit in a circle and they start asking each other, how did you cope with that? Because you see understanding in the eyes of those very same people, those like you, that they understand what you went through, because when you talk to civil specialists, you don't see understanding in their eyes. But when you sit together, even for a cup of coffee with your brothers in arms, you converse half an hour, so there is understanding, and this was my rehabilitation. And about the support, as you retire, really you face indifference. For example, in these social support agencies, like I'm wounded, I had trouble walking even, but they were sending me from one office to another. What else can I add? I think that, yeah, it's necessary. It's necessary to establish such initiatives, to do such things. Thank you, dear friends. Thank you for sharing your experience. Dear friends, I think that there are questions on the floor. I'm happy you have a lot of them, and maybe we will proceed to some off-records format further on. So if anybody has any questions, please introduce yourself. Good morning, Miss Yulia. I have a couple of questions. First of all, what are the countries that the Ministry of Veteran Affairs cooperates with in terms of rehabilitation of the military, both psychological and physical? And are there already programs in place for training of the retired military for their comfortable transition for civil life? We established the initiative for psychological rehabilitation this year, when we are being directly contracted by rehabilitation medical institutions who comply with a number of criteria. For example, if a medical institution which submits either to Ministry of Health or the communal medical institution, if they have psychologists and psychiatrists, they got contracted by us directly, and the veterans who undergo psychological support there, rehabilitation there, they go to those centers, and there were already 7,000 cases of psychological support, of psychological and physical rehabilitation in such centers. So people don't have to go to psychologists when they go back to civil life. They are being worked with by psychologists right there on spot in those institutions. We work with different countries. Recently, our delegation, my deputy, got back from the United States, where they studied the experience of psychological and physical rehabilitation which are in place in the United States, and we will see what can be implemented on our end. But our vision, by the first reactions after the visit to the United States, is that we go hand in hand, so to say, with the veteran policy in the United States. Their rehabilitation is based on the main key five rehabilitation centers in 5 states, where there is not only rehabilitation, but there are only training hubs, retraining hubs. We go along the way of reformation of our 5 centers, which submit to the Ministry for Veteran Affairs, and we also we signed the memorandum with International Organization for Migration, who will assist us in creation of 25 centers for veteran development, and in cooperation with the Ministry of Education, we will have our veterans referent in the best educational institutions of Ukraine. For both technical education and higher education, all those institutions, they have a potential in cooperation with us to cover the needs for a training for civil specialty for developing economy in all the regions in Ukraine. Last year we were working with Ukraine-Norway Fund within a scientific project. Our veterans are undergo rehabilitation under that project too, but we want to get on a new track for understanding of veteran policy as the policy of management of human resources in security and defense area. So we take some random region and we know that thousands of veterans will be going back there. For example, what's the economic component? What's the economic fundamental of that region? Is it construction or is it agriculture? So we see the military specialties of those people, who they were before the military service, and we will pick the programs for their retraining, but the end point should be employment, not only the study and retraining, because previously we had programs that where people were getting some, say, driver's license after retraining. It did not really influence their further integration into civil life. We cooperate actively with the Polish government in reconstruction of a rehabilitation center. We have a joint projects with USAID, UNDP, and thanks to the help of an American organization called IREX, we created the initiative, which corresponds with different Ukrainian agencies, is the electronic register of Ukrainian veterans. It's not yet launched due to the security reasons. We continue digitalization, and we will implement digital instruments in DIA to be client-oriented for our veterans, to create the veterans electronic cabinet and provide them with different services. It's almost ready, but we don't want somebody in occupied territories to show up in their, we don't want it to show up in their smartphones so that they can be identified as veterans. But after the victory, those services will be available to everybody as soon as they launched. More questions. Vitaly Zalewski, Channel 5. Yulia, can you please tell us when did you start working on that reform and when it will be started? Because we understand that veterans are already coming back home and this support is needed already now. We understand everything after the victory, but what about now? All the necessary regulations, all the necessary acts are already adopted, but to launch this reform, to start it, we need the coordination with Ministry of Defense, with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, with Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Education. We already commence it now. More legislative acts will be adopted soon, but we will have it approved by NSDC. Now this strategy is being coordinated and approved by all the ministry. There will be a roadmap, and this reform should take effect before our victory. But we also have to understand certain challenges, because let's take a very simple experience. The system of provision of servicemen with dwellings. 30 years of independence, well, everybody who served knows it, that there is a huge corruption component, and the main challenge is coping with it. We want to make sure that this system, when a veteran retires, to make sure that they already have their apartments, they have their homes. So how it happens in the army, For example, there are units, the construction department with the budgets way more expensive than it is in the market. They build something, and those servicemen who receive homes from the government, they know what's their quality. People get their homes of a very low quality that should not really exist. So there's a lot of challenges to overcome. We work with the Ministry of Defense very actively, but the institutional resistance of the system, who were feeling quite well all those 30 years, we want to overcome their experience. We want the system to work normally after our victory, and the servicemen, they have normal attitude to themselves. So I want our technical team, I want to ask our technical team to finish the broadcast, but if you have more questions, we can discuss them here. Well, there are no more questions.